Help support the show by joining the Patreon or becoming a YouTube member. Also, hit that like button and subscribe if you want more Browns-focused content. Now, on this channel, because the Browns have the number 2 pick, I spent a lot of time talking about Shedeur Sanders and Cam Ward because the Browns have the number 2 pick. Those are the top 2 quarterbacks. That's who most of the conversation is about when it comes to quarterback. But what about these guys in this draft who will be seen more as the value options, right? The guys who are going to go in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, maybe even 7th round. What about those guys? Now, this is not a comprehensive review, nor does it include every single prospect in this draft class, nor is it a final review on any of these players. This is just me talking about the back end of this quarterback class and what I see these players could or could not be and what their range of possibility is and for what reasons I think their range of possible outcomes are. So that's what I want to do today, talk about these quarterbacks, to give a light to the quarterbacks who don't normally get the big light on them because they're not the number 2, number 1 quarterbacks in the class. Let's start with Jaylen Milroe. Jaylen Milroe, I think, is the most interesting prospect in this class, and I think you're going to hear a ton of opinions on how to use him, right? There are going to be some people who see him as a Greg Roman system style quarterback where you could put him in, run him heavy from the quarterback position. There's going to be people who think that you just got to put him in an RPO heavy offense. There are going to be people who think, no, you need to force him into some more traditional sets. There are people who think you should just put him on the bench for a year. There are people who think you should put him on the bench for 2 years. There are people who think that he should go in the 1st round. There are people who think he should go in like the 7th round. You will find a different opinion about Jaylen Milroe if you ask 7 different people about Jaylen Milroe. I can guarantee that. He has a lot of things going for him. He has a lot of bad things going for him. He's not the most accurate quarterback, especially when it comes to his downfield passes. For as big as Jaylen Milroe is, he surprisingly has a pretty weak arm for somebody his size. He struggles to push and drive the football downfield. He struggles to have the ball kind of drive into the arm. And when I say drive, here's what I mean. Some guys will throw the ball deep, right? And they don't have enough spin on that ball to make it just stick right where they want it to go, right? Some guys throw that ball deep and it drifts and it looks like the wind takes it, right? Quinn Ewers is a great example of this. He has a really weak arm. So when he throws the ball and he has to go to the field side, so the long side of the field, you can see that if there's wind or anything going in there or just like time, that ball is going to drift. The same thing happens for Jaylen Milroe. Now, I don't know if this is because he has a weak arm or because he spins the ball and it over-rotates. I tend to think he's over-rotating the ball, that he has too strong of a grip upon release, which is causing the ball to spin out way faster than it needs to, which means when he throws the ball downfield, it's going to spiral one way or the other if there's any slight imperfection in his throwing motion. He needs to get that corrected. I think he overspins the football. But what that leads to is the ball drifting left and right a lot when he throws the ball downfield. I don't even think that's the biggest problem with Jaylen Milroe because you can live in the NFL and be a less than desirably accurate guy. I mean, Jalen Hurts lives in the NFL. He's not a super accurate passer, but he can be on time and he can give his wide receivers enough of a chance to attack the ball that doesn't really matter that he's super accurate or not super accurate, right? So I don't think the accuracy is the biggest problem with him, right? Because he has shown the ability to be on time. He has shown the ability to play within structure at certain points of his college career. What his biggest problem is he has unlivable pocket presence. It's bad. Capital B-A-D, bad. It might be the first thing you notice with him, right? There are times where he drops back and you feel like he has a sensory deprivation chamber over his head because he's not sensing a single thing. coming from. This leads to strip sacks, interceptions, long sacks, right? So his pocket presence to me is the worst thing about him as a prospect. He is a unbelievable, out of this world athlete. He is, for my money, the best offensive athlete in this draft class. He probably would be one of the fastest athletes in this draft class. There is countless footage of him outrunning Georgia's defense, outrunning LSU's defense, and many others in the SEC. This dude is probably the fastest guy on Alabama's roster, one of the fastest guys in the SEC, period. Jaylen Milroe's a fantastic athlete, and he has great instincts when it comes to his read option pulls, right? He's one of the best I've seen at that, where he's able to pull the ball last minute, get a big play. He makes really good decisions there. Another thing about Jaylen Milroe I think is worth noting is I think he's unbelievably book smart. This is somebody who didn't just graduate college in the short time that he was there, but got his master's degree. This is a really book smart young man who has won the academic, or at least has been nominated for the academic Heisman amongst student athletes. I don't think that should be forgotten. He is a book smart, really good athlete who struggles with accuracy a little bit and has bad pocket presence. My comp for him is on the low end, Kellen Mond, right? Like if you just draft him, you don't have a plan for him, he can easily be Kellen Mond. Now, if you have a plan for him, if you develop him for a couple of years or a year, I think he could turn into something closer to Colin Kaepernick, albeit with a much weaker arm than what Colin Kaepernick had in his prime. Remember, Colin Kaepernick had a laser beam throwing that football. Maybe if Jaylen kind of adjusts his throwing mechanics, he might end up having a laser beam, because I just can't believe a dude that big has that weak of an arm. I feel like it's something mechanically that's making his throws look as weak as they do. But yeah, right now you would say weaker arm Colin Kaepernick if you put him in the right position, you put him in the right situation. He's probably a better athlete than Colin Kaepernick is. He has a little bit more left-right wiggle than Colin Kaepernick did. Colin Kaepernick was a straight line athlete, and if we're speaking about straight line speed, he beats Colin Kaepernick in that. Both really big guys, hard guys to tackle, especially at the quarterback position. Here's where I feel he fits draft-wise as far as picks go. If you are a team with a quarterback, Jaylen Milroe is possibly worth a second-round pick, because you can sit him. There's going to be no pressure to start him, and you could develop him, right? Like Tampa Bay is a good example of a team that could draft Jaylen Milroe, because with Baker Mayfield, you're not going to have to start Jaylen Milroe anytime soon. You can let Baker's contract expire, or if Baker gets injured, then it might be time to see what you have in Jaylen Milroe after a year or so, right? But that is a situation I think that would make sense. If he ends up in the hands of the Harbaughs, that would make a lot of sense, right? He's somebody who would work with Jim or John Harbaugh in a system that either Lamar Jackson runs or that Greg Roman operates. So those are situations I think fit him best. I do think you got to get a little bit more creative if you're going to draft Jaylen Milroe, right? There are some prospects that require no creativity. You don't need to be creative at all. You don't need to think hard about this at all. This guy does very basic things well, and you can translate him pretty directly to another NFL player or to another NFL offense. Jaylen Milroe is going to require a great deal of creativity. Now, that may be because you might want to be creative with how you use him, especially early on. But the reason I say creativity is you can't just go and expect him to do what he did at Alabama, because if Jaylen Milroe is going to be a solid NFL quarterback, he has to be significantly better than he was at Alabama. So you don't want to bring back his college stuff. I think, and this is an outlier opinion, I will tell you this now. This is a pretty unique opinion of him that I have, but I do believe it, and I do think that it is a pretty solid opinion. If you draft Jaylen Milroe, there's going to be all kind of pressure to run gimmicks with him. because he's such a good athlete. But I think NFL coaches need to be open-minded to putting him in a more traditional, quarterback-friendly system that works for other prospects that you wouldn't necessarily assume it would work for Jaylen Milroe, right? The temptation is going to be strong to stick him in pistol and make his whole playbook RPO gimmick plays. But I do think if you put this guy under center and you run a wide zone scheme with him and you do some of the West Coast staples with him, put him in structure, make him be on time, move the pocket, play action boots, I think that will be better for him in the long run and in the short term. His biggest problem to me is his pocket presence. Everything else I can live with because he is such a fantastic athlete. Yeah, he's not that accurate, but if he can stay ahead of the sticks, he's a dangerous enough athlete to where linebackers will have to play up on him no matter what, which means he won't have to be the most accurate quarterback in the world, right? Like Jalen Hurts again. He gets away with being inaccurate all the time because he's such a threat to run the ball. Jaylen Milroe is a much bigger threat than Jalen Hurts is to run the football. He's a much better athlete. The problem with Jaylen Milroe is that he is much worse at the things that keeps him ahead of the sticks as Jalen Hurts is. So that is the big problem with him. So I don't think you could do what you do with Jalen Hurts with Jaylen Milroe. I think you need to put him in a lot of structure. And I think he will actually thrive in a lot of structure. Get him moving and get him to make quick decisions. And I think he'll eventually be able to stay ahead of the sticks. Another thing about Jaylen Milroe is that he's had a different offensive coordinator for every year he's been in college. I don't think that gets highlighted enough. So what he has demonstrated through his college career, academically and on the field, is that he can learn and pick up things really quickly. So I wouldn't doubt his ability to pick up a West Coast offense really quick or to kind of understand some of the more difficult nuances for rookies to understand. I think he can do all of that stuff. I think up here he has all the things that he needs to have. It's more about getting him in a position where he's not thinking about it and just doing it and using his amazing athletic ability to do things that nobody else can do. So you might hear me say West Coast offense, put him in a more traditional offense, and then hear me say he has horrible pocket presence and think that's a terrible combination. That is certainly a risk that you run. My bet is that being in a traditional offense that requires you to be on time, that requires you to tie your throw to your feet, that requires you to really drill these things down, will make it so that one, he's getting rid of the ball quickly and he doesn't have to worry about his pocket presence, or two, that he starts to develop better mechanics within that pocket because he's drilling these things down so much versus putting him in a spread where he's not really doing that many drops, where he's not asked to stay in the pocket and he has more freedom to exit the pocket. That's why I want him in structure. That's why I want him in a West Coast offense. This is a really book smart, super athlete who struggles to improvise. He's a bad improviser, right? Anytime he gets confused or has to get out of the structure of whatever he's running, he looks awful. So you need to make sure he's in a system where he doesn't have to improvise, where he can use his legs, be on the move, where he can throw downfield on the run, where I think he's at his best. All of that sounds like Kubiak offense stuff to me. It takes a lot of creativity to get there with him, but I think he is a West Coast offense quarterback. Doesn't have the strongest arm. West Coast offense quarterbacks usually aren't the strongest armed guys. I think he can have accuracy in the intermediate to short part of the field, but he struggles with deep ball accuracy. West Coast offenses run play actions because it doesn't require you to be super accurate on deep balls. And then the wrinkle of him being a great runner adds a lot to that West Coast offense when it comes to leverage on linebackers if he can run it properly. You develop him, you put him in a West Coast offense, I think it could work. That's why my range for him is somewhere between Kellen Mond and Colin Kaepernick. If you're a team that does not have a quarterback, you should probably not spend more than a third-round pick on him. And you should be really thoughtful about where you spend that pick. But that's where I'm at with Milroe. Team with the quarterback, second round pick. Team without a quarterback, he's a third round pick because you don't have the time to let him sit. And also, if you're going to draft him, I think you need to put him in structure. I think that's what's best for him, and what he will be the best version of himself doing and what he'll be able to develop doing. But it's going to take work, and it's not going to be a one-year thing. That's the issue. A lot of people are looking for one-year fixes at the quarterback position. You also have to ask yourself, who's going to want to wait 1 to 2 years for Jaylen Milroe to develop when 2026's class looks like it's going to have a lot of quarterbacks, in 2027's class looks like it's going to have a lot of quarterbacks. The last thing I want to say on Jaylen Milroe, and this is something I thought about as this video was literally rendering and getting ready to upload for YouTube, is he's kind of like a more athletic Tim Tebow. Is kind of like another way you could view him. If he had more college success, I think there would be more hype around him as a first-round pick, similar to how college success really elevated Tim Tebow to much higher status than what he was. But you could see like the similar stiffness and their ability to throw the football, the surprising lack of arm strength from somebody who has that big of a base, but some intangible, and in Jaylen Milroe's case, he has intangible and tangible ability to affect the game, especially as a runner, right? Like both these dudes, when they get their feet on the ground, are really good football players. So maybe a Tim Tebow comp kind of can replace the Kellen Mond one. Either way, he's in this kind of company of stiff passers, right? Even Colin Kaepernick was a very stiff thrower of the football, and that's going to be something he has to overcome. Jackson Dart is the next one. A lot of people are high on Jackson Dart. He seems like the draft hipster pick of the year. We'll see what happens with him at the Senior Bowl. What I've watched of Jackson Dart, I think he fits best in a highly structured offense. He works well with half-field reads and making quick decisions, right? If it's a pretty simple process of, okay, this, that, then I can throw that. He does that well. He's a good anticipatory thrower. His pocket mechanics are a bit flighty. His accuracy tends to come and go. Sometimes he's accurate, he's bang on. Sometimes he's just bang off, right? It comes and goes. He's also not a great improviser. He's a okay athlete, not a great athlete, not a bad athlete, but he's fine. I could see a team getting excited about him, especially a West Coast offense team, getting excited about him and taking him in a second, because I do think that of all of the quarterbacks that we're going to talk about in the back half of this draft, he probably has the best bet to be good early on or to be decent early on. So I can see a team get excited about him, take him late second. But I think his best value is third round, like around pick 90. If you get pick 90 and above, you get Jackson Dart. I think you should feel pretty good about that. My comp range for him is the low end is like Kenny Pickett. I think Kenny Pickett and him have a ton of similarities and positives and negatives. I think Andy Dalton is probably his ceiling, right? Like Andy Dalton was a guy who really did well when you had everything around him, good offensive line, great wide receivers, good offensive coordinator to get his eyes where they needed to be, and you can just have that put Andy in a really good situation to where he doesn't have to do too much. He just has to react, process, throw. If you do that with Jackson Dart, there might be the possibility of something being there. He's not an exceptionally arm-talented quarterback. He doesn't have like amazing arm strength. He does a good job layering footballs. I would say he's the third best in this class. 1 is Shador. Number 2 is Curtis Rourke. Number 3 is Jackson Dart. But I think he has better play versus elite teams than like Curtis Rourke does, which I do think matters. So yeah, that's where I'm at with Jackson. I think he's a third, fourth round pick. If you get him in the fourth round, that's pretty good value. If you get him in the third round, pick 90, yeah, you're fine with it, right? You'd be fine with Jackson Dart, pick 90. I think that's where you want to sit at. The next guy, Will Howard. There are moments that I have with Will Howard that make me think that he's better than I think. He's a pretty decent anticipatory thrower when he is committed to running the offense. He's somebody who has shown an ability to throw a really pretty deep ball at times. I think he has played his best football in some pressure situations, but also Will Howard makes a lot of mistakes. My comp for Will, big body quarterback who can move around a little bit, but is prone to making mistakes at times, but will give you moments where you think that this guy's like pretty good. Taylor Heineke and Jimmy Garoppolo. He's somewhere in between that for me, right? If everything goes right, you put him in a really good offensive line, wide receivers, I think you can get a Jimmy Garoppolo-like result, or at least it's possible you can get a Jimmy Garoppolo-like result. And let me be clear here for my top ends, because I think people are going to say, I think this guy is Andy Dalton. Like, I think that this guy is Jimmy Garoppolo. My low ends are what I think it's most likely a player turns into. Like, so for Jaylen Milroe, it's most likely if somebody just drafts him, doesn't have a plan, he's going to be Kellen Mond. The same way that Jackson Dart, if somebody just drafts him, they don't have a plan, it's going to be Kenny Pickett. Or Will Howard, if somebody just drafts him, they don't have a plan, it's going to be Taylor Heineke. But if you do have a lot around that quarterback, and he gets the perfect situation, and let's say he gets the right offense, the right coaching relationships, the right off the field stuff, then yeah, there's a chance that he could be similar to Jimmy Garoppolo if everything goes well for him. Same way that with Jackson Dart, there's a chance he could become Andy Dalton, and with Jaylen Milroe, there's a chance he could become somewhat around what Colin Kaepernick was. But that's where I have Will Howard's kind of thing. He's one of those guys who I think is most likely a backup in the NFL. But I do think there's a chance where enough things go right for him in his NFL career that he has a Jimmy G-like career. Doesn't mean it's likely, but it means that I do think it's possible for him. Dillon Gabriel is another quarterback here. Really experienced guy. He's played a ton of football. He's not as old as you would think. He's only, 24? But you would think he's like 30, as much football as he played. I believe he was on the national championship UCF team. Correct me if I'm wrong there in the comment section. But what he is really experienced. He can run an offense. He's undersized. He's a fast processor. He's been consistently at every school he's been pretty damn good at quarterback at the college level, right? He was good at Oklahoma. He was good at Oregon. He was a good quarterback at UCF, right? Every year he played, he was a good quarterback. I think he is going to be able to competently run an NFL offense. I think the issue with him is going to be how much are his physical limitations going to hinder his consistency in the NFL, because he's going to measure in with small hands. I don't think he's going to run the fastest 40 time. This is where the comps get kind of difficult with him, right? Like if he were 6'2" and he ran a 4.5 40, he would be a much different prospect. But he is not 6'2". He does not run a 4.5 40, or at least for what I know, he's not 6'2", and for what I know, he does not run a 4.5 40. He does have enough to where I can safely project him to be a backup for a good period of time in the NFL, but the upside, I think, is going to always be limited by his lack of size and any kind of other physical traits to kind of compensate for it, right? Russell Wilson's sub 6 foot, but Russell Wilson was a very explosive athlete coming out of Wisconsin. I know it doesn't seem like it now because y'all watching old Russ, but go watch some Russ highlights back in Wisconsin. You'll see what I'm talking about. The brother was explosive. There were other guys who are small, but maybe they have big hands. I don't think he has big hands. I don't think he's a special athlete. I just think he is pretty good at processing the game, making quick decisions, and throwing the football at a decent level. My comp for him is I think he's most likely going to end up having like the same career Troy Smith had. There is a chance if you put him in the right system, you get him around the right coaches, you could get Colt McCoy out of him. But that's the range that I think Dillon Gabriel safely will kind of take up in the NFL. I just think the height and the hand size thing and the lack of speed combined with those are going to be something that affects his consistency, but he will be able to give you some really good games here and there because he is a really smart player and he's a really experienced player. So I think he will be a solid backup spot starter type guy. Case Keenum's another example you can throw out there. But he's always going to be hampered by that lack of size. Let's go to Curtis Rourke. Now, he has a torn ACL, or at least he played with a torn ACL. So that does affect how I view some of his tape from this year. That being said, Curtis Rourke is a pretty good anticipatory thrower. I think he layers the ball the second best in the class. What hurts him is that he is significantly older than the rest of this class. I believe he's 25. He's even older than like Dylan Gabriel is. When he played against elite competition in college football, he looked awful. Everything you liked about him just straight up went away. He's coming off a torn ACL, so who knows when he's going to be able to play for you. This kind of feels like Hendon Hookery. Like it feels like drafting Hendon Hooker, where it's like, okay, you drafted him in the third round, but he's never played for you. So do you really want to draft a dude like that in the third round? There are things in there to make you excited. I think the range for Curtis Rourke is CJ Beathard to discount Sam Bradford. I think if everything goes right for him, he could be a discount version of what Sam Bradford was, which is a solid starter with some size who can't really move and might have an injury problem going forward. With Dylan Gabriel, with Will Howard, with Curtis Rourke, I have similar draft grades on them. As of right now, this could change, but as of right now, I would say all these guys are day 3. Right, round 4 or later, you feel good about it. I think all of these guys, you would feel a lot more comfortable drafting them in the 5th round. Will Howard, I would feel more comfortable with him in the 5th round. Dylan Gabriel, I would feel more comfortable with him in the 5th round. Curtis Rourke, I would feel more comfortable with him in the 5th round. All right, let's talk about Riley Leonard. Now we go to guys who I think are strictly going to be backups in the NFL with no real potential to be anything more than that. Riley Leonard's a big body, pretty good athlete, good runner at the football. His accuracy is questionable. You've seen that if you watched him play. Not sure if he can play on time is another problem. His pocket presence isn't terrible, but it isn't good. He reminds me of Kevin Hogan, 5th, 6th round. That's what I have on Riley Leonard. And then Quinn Ewers, this is the last quarterback that I'm going to talk about. This is the last guy I've been able to watch a good enough amount to feel like I can have an opinion on. Every other quarterback, if I have not named them, it's because I have not watched them enough to have a serious opinion on. And I'm not going to put myself in a position to just bullshit you, right? A lot of people will. I'm not going to bullshit you. I don't know anything about quarterbacks that are not on this list because these are the guys I've watched well enough to have a informed enough opinion about. Quinn Ewers is the last guy. I don't get the fascination with Quinn Ewers. I know a lot of people are fascinated with Quinn Ewers. Maybe this is one of those things where I can't see it, right? Because I couldn't see it last year with Bo Nix, and Bo Nix ended up being pretty decent. So if you want to claim that Quinn Ewers is going to be good, this is my Bo Nix miss, cool, go ahead and do it. I just don't think that's going to be the case, right? Because I am much more sure about Quinn Ewers not being good than I was about Bo Nix. Quinn Ewers is just not an accurate downfield passer, like first and foremost. He's just straight up bad at that. The arm strength is beyond questionable into the point where it's just straight up a liability. It's not a question, does he have good arm strength? It's just a liability for him. He is smart enough to run an offense, right, at the NFL level. And I think he will be a fine coach one day if he commits to it. But I see him in the same range there. His best case scenario for me is he could become discount Case Keenum. I think he probably ends up being JT Barrett. I think he has a 6th round to UDFA grade. I would not consider spending anything close to a premium pick on Quinn Ewers. I'm out on the Quinn Ewers thing, right? I don't know. Maybe some people like him because he used to be a 5-star. Maybe there's something I'm missing when I watch him. I do not see an NFL quarterback when I see Quinn Ewers. I see somebody who is smart enough to be able to operate the game at a high level in college football, but ultimately is not talented enough to be able to execute that vision in NFL games, which surprises me because he's a 5-star athlete. Like, you would think that you would see what made him a 5-star, but I think he is at best a discount Case Keenum. Maybe I'm wrong on that. Maybe that's too harsh. Y'all let me know in the comment section down below. Now, look, I expect that some of you guys heard some of these comps and are outraged that I compared a player that you like to Case Keenum but worse, or to Troy Smith, or to Colt McCoy, or this, that, and the third. It is important to remember that of all quarterbacks to ever be drafted, Colt McCoy, it's a pretty high outcome, right? It's a pretty rare outcome in the positive direction. Same thing with somebody like Andy Dalton. We have this tendency in the draft to project players, if you like them a little bit, to be current big-time starters in the league, right? You're going to hear somebody say Jackson Dart, he's just like Dak Prescott, right? And you think about it. You're comparing somebody who's a day 2, probably day 3 pick to a multiple-time Pro Bowl player. When most of the time, most guys enter the league, they're kind of like Kevin Hogan. Not saying that I think that Jackson Dart is Kevin Hogan, but just understand in the pre-draft process, we tend to be way, way, way higher with our comps than I think is necessary, right? I take issue when people constantly compare quarterbacks to Kirk Cousins as if it's some easy thing to obtain to be Kirk Cousins in the NFL. That is a top 1% NFL career there that Kirk Cousins has had in the NFL. You're not just going to draft some slub off the street and he's going to have Kirk Cousins' career because you don't see that much special in his tape. Really think about who you're comping these players to. Really think about what that says about the player that you're comping them to and the player that you're comping. Think about all of that, because I see way too many draft people go on and feel comfortable throwing a Kirk Cousins comp out there, throwing a Pro Bowl quarterback comp out there. Like, for example, I think my comp for Shedeur Sanders is what Teddy Bridgewater was as a prospect coming out of Louisville. Not necessarily what his career ended up being, because his career got sidelined by multiple ACL injuries, but what Teddy Bridgewater was as a prospect, which was somebody who projected to be, kind of a low floor guy who could be a starter for you, but not necessarily like a tier 1 or 2 guy, right? Not going to be elite, not going to be upper echelon, but maybe a guy who touches a Pro Bowl once in their career. And that's what kind of Teddy was looked at coming out. Now, some people hear me say that, hear Teddy Bridgewater, and remember that Teddy Bridgewater isn't the greatest name you've ever heard, and then think that I hate Shedeur Sanders as a prospect, when in fact Shedeur Sanders right now as it speaks is probably my number 1 quarterback on the board. I'm not super high on quarterbacks in this class in general, but Shedeur is probably number 1 there. That does not mean I dislike him, because I'm not going over the top with my comp for him. And I think we're so used to everybody going over the top all the time that when somebody chooses not to, it feels like disrespect. But a Teddy Bridgewater comp, that's a late first-round pick. That's a guy who had a chance to be a starter in the NFL for a long time, but unfortunately injuries derailed his career. I mean, that's not a disrespectful comp. We'll see if it ends up being the truth, but we tend to add on because we're looking at these quarterbacks not just through an analytical lens, not just through a film process lens, but we're also looking at these quarterbacks through a hopeful lens, which makes us add and project other things onto these guys. So yeah, I compared quarterbacks here and said that their best case scenario is Jimmy Garoppolo. That is not an insult. That means I like the prospect if I think that they could eventually be Jimmy Garoppolo, especially if I think they're a day 3 pick and they can do that. That means I like the prospect, right? Now, Quinn Ewers, somebody I don't like, I said discount Case Keenum, because I don't even think he's good enough to be Case Keenum, because again, Case Keenum, pretty rare outcome for most NFL quarterbacks that are drafted. Just think about that, right? But that's my thoughts on that. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.